Hey Kid Life! So today we are going to be in the New Testament and we're going to talk about Paul. We've been talking about Paul in the past couple weeks, and so some of these things that I say will sound a little bit familiar. So Paul, he would write these letters, and these letters would go to believers to encourage them of what it looks like to follow Jesus. And so he would write these letters, but remember, Paul was not always a believer. He did not always follow Jesus, but when he made that decision, when he made that choice, he put his trust in Jesus and he was all in. He would travel to so many different places and would get to be able to talk about what it was like to follow Jesus. And so he would do these things, and there was a place where he started a church in this place called Ephesus. So he starts this church, but then he leaves and he comes back and he stays there for several years. Now we know that these believers that he would talk to, they had one thing in common. They came from different backgrounds, but they had one thing in common, and that was that they believed in Jesus and they believed that he died and he rose again. And so we also know that Paul got into a lot of trouble because there were places that they did not want him speaking about Jesus. We know in the Roman government, he got sent to jail because he was so bold in speaking about Jesus and he wanted everyone to know. This gives, I would say, Paul a really good reason to maybe complain. He was in jail. He's probably like, what is happening? I want to talk about Jesus. I love talking about Jesus. And now I'm in this situation where it wasn't the best place to be in. But that is not what Paul did. He did not complain. Instead, he used that to be able to write these letters to different churches. And he got super creative in that way, that he thought that was the best way to be able to tell others about who he is. So one of these letters comes from the book of Ephesians 2:10, and we are going to break down this verse. So it starts off by saying that we are God's creation. And what does that mean? How can we break that down? And that's simple. All that means is that we are made in God's image. That means we look like him, and that could mean so many different things too. But God is creative, and this whole month we're talking about creative and being creative and what that looks like. So we know God is creative, so we can be too. Now the second part of this verse says we are God's creation. We are created in Christ Jesus. That's what it says. And that means when we put our trust in him, we know that changes the way we see things. And it changes our perspective, and it makes us look, but outside of ourselves, it makes us look at how can we help others. And this story, we just talks about how we're able to do that in creative ways. So we got that part of our verse. And the next thing it goes on to say, so we are God's creation, created in Christ Jesus for good works. And that just simply means we are able to do these good works. And when I say that, it is saying we are able to help others. And how that can look like is helping others with our actions, with our words, with being encouraging. And we know that God has planned all this out for us. We are all creative in different ways, and we can use those gifts that God has given us to find these ways to help others. So we have all these things down, right? This verse, God created us. We are in his image. We are created in his image to do good works that God has planned beforehand for us to do. So he has planned this all along. And how does that look like? When you think about the word creative, some of you may think immediately, well, creative, maybe that is like drawing this amazing masterpiece. What if it's maybe creating songs, or it may be building things with your hands. and getting creative in that way, and that's not all it means, right? There are some people that they are great artists and they can paint a beautiful picture, but there are other people that are creative and they're really good with electronics, with technology, and all that kind of stuff. So there's different ways of being creative. It doesn't look like one thing. But we know that God has created us to be creative. And some of you guys may think, well, what? I don't know how creative I am. I don't know the gifts that I have that make me creative. And you can ask your parents of what they see in you. But most importantly, you can come to God and say, God, how am I creative? And that may be looking into some things that you're passionate about or things that you love to do. And it may be like, how can I use that to help others? So if we think about the creative side of maybe painting or writing or building things, how can you use that to help others? Maybe it's painting this picture and mailing it to a friend to make their day. Maybe it's just playing a game or finding some time to be intentional with your friends during this time. Also, it could look so many other different ways. Just thinking about there's not one thing you could do. There's so many things that we can do when it comes to being creative and helping others, because we know that God has created you to be creative. A church in Ephesus. Church in Ephesus.